half of Brazil has the brainworm that makes you basically psychotic.
Well, it doesn't make you psychotic.
It makes you risk-taking, crazy.
Yes, it affects your judgment. This is Toxoplasmosis.
It programs you to want to have more cats, smell piss.
Yes. Well,
You've probably heard online or seen on a popular podcast about how a parasite called Toxoplasma gondii might be controlling your mind and maybe even making people into crazy cat ladies.
Known as the crazy cat lady.
Well, I'm here to set the record straight today. Hello everyone, my name is WormTalk, I have a PhD in biology, and here I make videos about parasitology. And Toxoplasmosis has probably been the most requested video topic on every single one of my videos. And today I want to break down the biology of this parasite, can it really cause schizophrenia in people, and give you some information about the up-to-date data on this parasite. So, to really understand this parasite, Toxoplasmosis, or really any parasite, the first step is to understand its life cycle, and that's displayed right here. Now, Toxoplasmosis, as many people know, is related to cats, and that's what we would call its definitive host. And definitive host just means that the parasite sexually reproduces in this particular animal. And for Toxoplasmosis, that's a domestic or really any wild cat. Now, inside the cat's gut, the parasite will produce an oocyst stage after sexually reproducing, and this will be passed in the feces of the cat. And because many things in nature are gross, a rat, a mouse will then come along and eat the feces of the cat.
And then they eat the poo-poo.
Or will drink some water that has been contaminated with the cat's feces. Once eaten by a rat or a mouse, the parasite will then be released from its cyst in the digestive tract of the animal, and the parasite will then penetrate the gut of the animal, and the parasite will be eaten up by the immune cells of the rat or the mouse. And inside the immune cells, the parasite has formed a protective layer around itself that I'll talk about a little bit later. In this immune cell, the parasite will then go on to asexually reproduce, eventually bursting the cell and infecting other local cells wherever it ends up bursting, infecting tissues from the muscle up to the brain of the rat. And from there, the parasite just kind of waits, and it waits for a cat to come along, hopefully, and eat this rat so the parasite can complete its life cycle. Now, this is the simplest form of the Toxoplasma life cycle. However, rats and mice get eaten by a lot of other animals, so being clever, Toxoplasma can also infect every other warm-blooded animal that it comes in contact with. So if this rat gets eaten by something like a pig or a hawk, this parasite will then infect them as well. It will asexually reproduce in the pig cells and then multiply so that it can kind of just be passed along, hopefully one day making its way back to a cat.
Now double it and give it to the next person.
This in turn makes Toxoplasma arguably one of the most successful parasites on the globe because it's able to infect such a wide range of hosts and able to spread between things that aren't in its standard life cycle. And this is also how humans acquire this parasite most frequently, through a variety of eating raw meats. Now, when infecting all these random hosts, a portion of the parasites will end up in the brain of the host. And this is where a lot of the hype around this parasite begins to start, and where a lot of the common talking points around it begin to derail from the actual science that's out there. And this is where those talking points made by Joe Rogan and Alex Jones at the beginning of this video start to come into play, where people believe that this parasite can make people attracted to cat pee and kind of cause crazy cat ladies. Now, the obvious question is, where did these internet theories really start off? And for once, we actually have a pretty easy answer to this question. Well, this popular internet theory came from two main sources. Now, the first is pretty easy because there has been a lot of research done using this parasite in rodent models that show that when infected, these animals have different behavior. And researchers have tested this in a variety of different ways, but it really boils down to a few simple experiments. You see, researchers will take mice and they'll put them in some kind of enclosure, like a maze, a choice that they can wander into a few different areas of the maze. And in one of these corners of the maze, they'll put cat urine, which has a very strong and distinct odor. These animals have been evolved to avoid cat urine because cats are one of their main predators. However, if the rat or the mouse was previously infected with Toxoplasma, the rat doesn't show this avoidance behavior anymore. In fact, they'll just as likely to go to the cat urine as they are to go towards other corners with different species of urine that they're not afraid of. In fact, some other studies even suggest that when infected, these rats or mice have more exploratory behavior, meaning they're more willing to venture out and do more risk-taking behavior. And this is theorized to be caused by the parasite because it can increase the likelihood that the rat would encounter a cat, therefore helping the parasite complete its life cycle. Now, results between these individual studies can be highly variable, but this is believed to be due to the different genetic lineages of the parasite. In the same way that COVID had different variants that had different harshness to certain people, the same thing's going on with this parasite in that some of these genetic lineages exert more control over their host than others. Now, this general theory that Toxo exhibits some sort of behavior mechanism in rats and mice is relatively agreed upon in the literature. However, that doesn't explain why so many people think that this parasite manipulates people as well. And the reason for that brings us to our second main factor leading to these theories online. You see, in the last few decades, there have been a slew of papers to come out looking at relationships between humans with risk-taking behaviors, things like entrepreneurship, and other things like diseases and schizophrenia, which have compared the rates of toxoplasmosis in these people and these behaviors or diseases. These are all perfectly fine studies.
They're great.
And one commonality with a lot of these studies is that they're all correlation-based studies, meaning that they take a large pool of data and they try to see if two variables, being toxoplasmosis and some type of risk-taking behavior or disease, and they're trying to see if these variables correlate at all at some degree. And while this is an important step in understanding where diseases originate from and understanding how diseases present, it can often be misleading to people when they try to over-explain what this data actually shows. For example, there's a positive correlation between number of ice cream sales and murder rates. And this doesn't suggest that ice cream drives people towards aggression, though personal anecdotes from my pregnant wife suggest that the inverse can. But it shows that ice cream sales are best in the summer when it's hot, and crime is more prevalent in the summer as well. So what these studies on Toxo suggest to me is that people who engage in risky behavior are probably just more likely to eat raw meat like beef tartare, and as a result pick up this infection rather than the other way around. And I feel pretty confident about this assumption because the global average rate of this parasite is estimated to be about a third of people have picked up this parasite at some point in their lives, with some countries like South Korea having somewhere between 2 and 6% of their population having it, and other countries such as Lebanon, over 80% of people have picked up this parasite. However, counterintuitive to what the other studies would suggest, people in Lebanon actually have a lower rate of schizophrenia than people in South Korea. So other factors such as genetics, birth complications, drug use, and trauma are much more likely to be contributing to this debilitating disease than things like Toxoplasma gondii are. Moreover, in a birth cohort study, which is a study that follows people from the point they're born to a later point in their life, all done around the same birth year, this study had about 800 people, and they compared Toxoplasma infection rates over time and the development of certain diseases such as schizophrenia, major depression disorder, behavior control issues, and they found that there was no relationship between infection with Toxoplasma or the development of these mental health disorders, suggesting that Toxoplasma really isn't causing mental health craziness in people as many suggest. Now, all that said, I'm not suggesting that Toxoplasma isn't important to human health. The vast majority of people who pick up this parasite will encounter minor flu-like symptoms, with some even going completely asymptomatic. However, there are some important caveats to that generality. So I'm sure you've heard that if a woman is pregnant, she should never be around cat poop or picking up cat feces, and this parasite is the reason for that. You see, if a pregnant woman gets infected with this parasite, particularly during her third trimester, it can cause serious birth complications, including hydrocephalus, microcephalus, blindness, epilepsy, and several others. And that's why when women get pregnant, a lot of them receive the Torch Panel diagnostic test, which is a test done to see what diseases a woman might have already or have encountered, with the T in Torch standing for Toxoplasma, so that if there are birth complications, this parasite can be ruled out or can be addressed appropriately. Additionally, if someone is immune suppressed, Toxoplasma can become a very serious life-threatening disease, and in particular during the AIDS crisis, it was a major killer, unfortunately. And in many of these cases, people with HIV, which progressed into AIDS, late infection of Toxoplasma acted up and led to their death, meaning that the people acquired Toxoplasma earlier in their life, and when their immune became fully suppressed from AIDS, the parasite was able to re-emerge and unfortunately lead to their death. Organ transplant patients can also be impacted by this parasite for similar reasons because they are immune suppressed. However, nearly all people that get infected with this parasite don't require any sort of treatment unless they have these other complications such as pregnancy or immune suppression. And if they are, Fortunately, therapies have been developed to help counteract this parasite and address it before it becomes a life-threatening issue. So I hope this video helped clear up some of the confusion surrounding Toxoplasma gondii. Toxoplasma gondii does not make people attracted to cat pee, even though people like Alex Jones may believe it, but it can be a small factor contributing to mental health disorders, though at current this data isn't that well supported and it needs to be more thoroughly investigated. Now, if you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. To people that subscribe, my next video will probably take a little bit longer. As I mentioned, my wife's pregnant and she will be going into labor in the next few weeks. So I might be a little slower getting out my next few videos, but I hope that's not too much of a problem for all of you. Have a nice day.